Hi, welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is bits and pieces. So I've been watching today's edition of Crosstalk, the home edition. It's Monday, as it usually is when he does the home editions. And a lot of stuff was again discussed about Ukraine. And as I was listening, the idea came up, or that unfortunately the narrative stays the same. The zoomed in type of view of everything remains the same. They are not looking at the bigger picture. Or, well, I try to look at the bigger picture, but who says I'm right? Or who says I'm wrong? And that is what I actually want to talk today about. So firstly, let's go about the electrical system that is being currently destroyed in Ukraine. As we know, or as you should know by now, if you watched the normal pro-Russian commentators, is that Russia has been bombarding the electrical power distribution network in Ukraine, and that about 40% of that system has now been destroyed. But Russia states that they are only focusing on military use, and if you interpret that, not on civilians, but if you look at it and interpret that correctly, and if it is what the Russians are meaning, then it will be destroying the power nodes that supply the railway lines, because the railway lines are used for the transport of logistical items for the for the Ukrainian army, as well as Western weapons that are brought by the trains to the front. And they said, and they're not destroying the civilian infrastructure. Now, if this is true, then 60% of the current electrical power distribution system in Ukraine is still functioning. And it's not a total collapse of Ukraine itself. I made a different video where I basically argued that all problems can be solved. And I suggested a method by which I believe, if I was an expert, this option should have been investigated, and there's a possible scenario for restoring power supplies to civilian people. Well, today I also watched a video of Gonzalez Lira, and if you knew about it, and you should know about it because it has been many times handled in our video, my videos and other videos, Gonzalez is actually living in Ukraine, in Kharkiv region. And he has made one video where he discusses he has now a blackout. But he's still making videos, he's still living there, and he's still buying groceries and making food. And if it's cold, and I believe it's cold, he still gets heating because he's not wearing any heavy coats inside his own flat. So life is still sustainable. It is not that Kharkiv is without power or energy, and it's still a functioning state, city, if that's the correct word. So all this hoo-ha about the Russians that are destroying the power structure of Ukraine, it sounds like it is absolute chaos, and this will lead to anarchy and the total collapse of the Ukrainian civil society. But if Gonzalez can make videos, and if he doesn't wear weather clothes inside his flat, still can buy groceries and etc., and can make food, then surely that should be a sign that the narrative being currently distributed by the pro-Russians are a little bit over-exaggerated. And the only reason why I always mention it is that, you know, at the end of the day, both sides, pro-Russians and pro-Westerns, are all spreading fake news and No, not always deliberately. They are believing their own narrative, so it's not that they are lying. But if it's the truth, you got to think twice a little bit about that. That is why I'm actually mentioning it. See the other side of the coin. So, in my opinion, Ukraine is still functioning and it's not going to collapse. Then in the same crosstalk, they talked about, I think Martin J talked about that the wife of Zelensky has talked to some other newspaper or magazine, whatever, and she said that yes, she talked to a couple of people in Ukraine, and they are all happy to sustain the fight, take the inconvenience, take the lack of certain resources, and for the sake of Ukraine, they are willing to continue this fight and suffer, but they believe that's a small price to pay. Well, then Martin J says, fine. I'm not criticizing Martin, don't get me wrong. He says that yes, Zelensky's wife probably only talked to the elite or the group around her, and they are all oligarchs and have enough money to pay for diesel generators and pay for fuel on the black market. But he doesn't think it's representative of the general population. Which is fine. I'm actually believing him in that. But again, one has to look a little bit at the bigger picture. Ukraine was basically a very well-off country in the Soviet Union times. It had a fairly large GDP, and life was fairly well off. But after the fall of the USSR, Soviet Union, Ukraine basically started to collapse, and it became one of the poorest countries in Europe, and also, according to EU, the most corrupt government or most corrupt country in Europe. And there are a lot of oligarchs, and there's a lot of conniving and criminal elements. And if you look at the history and so on, a lot of the people enrich themselves. And if you also notice, read some articles, you will find that BlackRock and Vanguard and so on bought a lot of farmlands in Ukraine, etc., and then took a large share in the gas transport line. Basically, they were strip mining the assets of Ukraine. Something very similar happened to Russia. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia brought in Western consultants. The consultants advised them, naturally, in favor of Americans. And the Americans came in, stimulated oligarchy, Russian citizens who bought state assets at bargain prices and created the new oligarch, Russian oligarch, and which then were sold to the Americans' financiers. Basically strip mining Russia. Luckily, Russia was capable of stopping and reversing some of the trend, and therefore we have the Russia that we have today. But what was also concerned, there was also known that at the fall of the USSR, things went very, very bad for the civilization. There were a lot of alcoholism and suicides and so forth, and people died of hunger and all that stuff. And they were also the establishment of the so-called Russian mafia, which became very prominent. Same as the oligarch. And then we also looked at which other country was also strip mined. I think Kosovo. I'm not totally sure. Or was it Serbia? But in any case, after the conflict as well, the Americans came in and bought the industry on the cheap. Basically, again, stripping the assets. Now, if you consider this, and if you consider the background of Ukraine, then you have to ask yourself the question, why are the leaders of Ukraine sacrificing Ukraine for the benefit of America. Why are they continuing a war that they cannot possibly win and will lead to the destruction of their country and basically will result in a smaller Ukraine and will create suffering and poor civil populations in Ukraine? Well, then the answer is fairly simple. The leaders of Ukraine doesn't care about the population. They only care about themselves. They are effectively have strip mined Ukrainian assets over the last 8 years or so to American corporations. They basically have now this whole military assistance given by the Americans. There's no control over that, so smuggling is going on the big time for American weapons. They have no control over that. They are washing basically funds in order to enrich themselves, and well, some people say FTX exchange was a good example, but I'm sure it's not the only one. They have different means of channeling out funds out of Ukraine and enriching themselves. And there was a little bit of another information that's available. You know, when they accuse Putin of having billions stashed away in the Western world and Putin is a criminal and etc., 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 the Western financial systems went after that and were looking for Putin's money. But they couldn't find Putin's money. But what they did find is they found the money of Zelensky. And they found out that since he took over as president until now, he has accumulated more than $800 million in this very short period. Now, what does that mean? That just means that that money was accumulated by criminal means and bribes and etc., etc., and it's probably all American money. All for smuggling operations. And what do we know about politicians in any case? All politicians are crooks, and they all lie, and they only care about themselves. Now look at the American politicians. They are all wealthy, incredible wealth, and as soon as they are in power, their wealth increases. So how does that work? It's not by their salaries, it's by conniving, bribery, kickbacks. That's how they get their money. It's commonly known. Nobody talks about this. But why do the Ukrainians, the politicians, still care a little bit about the population? Well, they wanted to be re-elected. So they have to do some things in order to be to pacify the population and then basically be re-elected and then continue with their criminal activities, their selfish interest. Well, that's how they work. And they don't need to do it for the 4 or 5 years of their terms. They only have to do it for maybe a couple of months before the election, because people have a very short memory. And, well, they will forget about all the corruptions. And by the time they come to election, then talking some nice words and so on, pops your uncle, people are convinced, people vote you again. Yeah, but why doesn't Zelensky do it? Simple. There are no elections in Ukraine anymore. Zelensky has got rid of all the opposition parties and any opposition television series and television stations. And basically, he's at war, so there will be no elections. So until the war has ended, he's in command. And as long as he's in command, he can enrich himself and suffer off money from America and Europe and so on. I dare anybody to tell me that's not happening. So in any case, Zelensky is not dependent on pacifying or getting the support of the population. He's only he's in a war state. He's now a dictator, basically authoritarian figure. Well, in principle. It depends on how you want to argue. Is he a puppet of Americans? Does he say and it's just a face? Or is he a sort of a leader that works that is controlled by America, but has still a little bit of self-interest and self-autonomy, a little bit. Depends on how you view. But it doesn't matter how much, how you see it. At the end of the day, he is the perceived president of Ukraine, and he's in power, and that is where he's going to stay until the problems are resolved. He doesn't care about the population. Make no mistake. He's now in enrichment. And as we all, and he's not a very old person, he's fairly young. And what is the biggest problem of the youth of today? Instant gratification and short-term goals. Zelensky doesn't worry when he has a political career for the next 5 or 10 years. He doesn't care whether Ukraine survives or not. He is interested in enriching himself now, and he has to do it as much as possible until the trough runs empty. That's it. That's all that he wants. $800 million is not too bad, with a villa in Spain and all, and the Cayman Islands and bank account. Hell, 800 million is quite a amount, but it's going to get more. So nobody is going to create a negotiate peace, not from the Ukrainian side, because we are looking at the American interest, and as Americans have stated, they will fight until the last Ukrainian. They don't care. Neither does the leaders of Ukraine care. Maybe the fanatical right-wing nationalists, maybe. But as soon as they will taste money, they are also criminals in a sense. And as soon as they taste money, they will be bribed and they will do whatever is necessary. But patriotic people, very few of them. Money talks. And that's all that cares. So this narrative of the pro like Peter Lavelle, I have a lot of respect for him and so on. You know, it's unfortunately, I can't agree with them. They are still limited in their view and still look at what people say. What people say and what they do are different things. And has been constantly being shown by American politicians, Zelensky, etc., etc. Well, we don't know how long the Europeans are going to support this, but does it really matter? Americans are in any case financing this. And then all this rigmarole about the Americans who they should rather not spend the money on Ukraine, they should rather do the domestic. And when the Republicans take over the House of Representatives and the Senate and so on, then the funds is going to stop to Ukraine. No. Statements are already made. Republicans are supporting the financing of Ukraine, as expected. Everybody expected. I don't know why it makes a big issue. The money is still going to flow to America from to Ukraine. And does it cost the Americans anything? No. Why not? Because they can print money. And they don't care about the debt. They know the debt is never going to be repaid back. Before that, the dollar will collapse and Bob's your uncle. So they have an unlimited checkbook. And they can print money. And they will also print money in order to cover domestic problems, in order to pacify the population. But money to Ukraine, that's not going to stop. And as long as that doesn't stop, Zelensky and his cronies and the oligarchs and the nationalists, they're going to collect their cut. And once, like I said, the trough runs empty, the war is past, it's over, Ukraine has been destroyed, they will move out of Ukraine if they haven't done it before and live in luxury. That is how it's going to be. Because that is what politicians are. They're all gangsters with a tie and a jacket and a smooth talking mouth. Anyways, that's my story for today. Subscribe, share the link, tell your friends, and until next time. Cheers.